So Checo will be in the Red Bull come Zandvoort. That's what Christian Horner told team personnel yesterday at the factory in Milton Keynes. Checo remains a Red Bull Racing driver despite all the speculation of recent times. We look forward to seeing him perform on circuits where he has done well before after the summer break. But hang on a second, does that mean he'll be in the seat till the end of this year? When you listen to the words that Christian Horner used, perhaps that's not the case. He could have emphatically said that, but he chose not to. Circuits where he has done well before. That doesn't mean till the end of the season. Somehow this statement managed to leave more questions than answers, and the way I'm interpreting this, I think Checo has a 4-race streak coming up where it's now or never. My name's Tommo. Let's talk about it. Red Bull Racing, and particularly Christian Horner, have every reason to want to try and make this Checo-Red Bull relationship work. He's been very loyal to Christian, something that was particularly clear during the whole text message leak fiasco that went on earlier this year. Checo made it very clear that his loyalty lies with Christian Horner. He has been able to perform well relative to Max on occasion. It's not like it's never ever happened. He's fulfilled that perfect number 2 driver role that Red Bull want a few times. And of course he's very commercially viable, not only bringing sponsors to that Red Bull Racing team, but shifting a lot of merchandise and a lot of Red Bull cans in Mexico. Remember, Christian has the loyalty of the Uvidja family, the entire 51% owners of Red Bull, so keeping them happy is more likely to keep Christian in his job, especially when you consider the Mintzlaff, Jos Verstappen, Helmut Marko side of the business doesn't seem to be as big a fan of Christian. They've absolutely kicked the can down the road here in terms of the Checo situation, like absolutely. But I do think they're telling the truth when Red Bull say they want to make this work for Checo, and Christian wants to make this work for Checo for all the reasons I've just outlined. Kind of felt similar about Alex in 2020 actually. I think Red Bull did really want to make that work. He's young, he'd stacked up pretty well relative to Max during that spell in 2019 when he took Pierre Gasly's seat, and of course his tyre. I'm under no illusion that of course the Uvidjas would have liked to see a tyre driver, succeed in that car, but unfortunately, it wasn't to be. Red Bull must have, and were rightly, confident that 21 would be a title fight for Max. And was Alex the driver to support Max? Off of what we saw in 2020? No. Off what we saw in 2020 from Checo, he looked like a much more appealing prospect. And you got to look at those moments again, Turkey, Abu Dhabi, where Checo did step up. Did he do a great job over the course of the season? No, but he did enough in those kind of clutch moments. Would Alex have been able to do the same? We'll never know. Checo's lacking confidence in a tricky car that doesn't fit his natural style and is being exposed by the fact the rest of the pack have caught up. Realistically, I don't think he's that much further off Max than he has been performance-wise for the majority of his career at Red Bull Racing. However, again, the competitor landscape is making this situation much more dire, and Red Bull actually have something to lose, the Constructors' title. Sergio would be P8 if it wasn't for George's disqualification in Spa, whereas Max is 78 points ahead of P2. That says everything you need to know. Both McLaren boys are firing. The Mercedes seems to have caught some pace out of nowhere and are catching up. They've had a slow start, but they're going to score big points for the remaining 10 races. And if Red Bull don't win the Constructors, it is firmly down to Checo's side of the garage not performing. And I want to reiterate his side of the garage, not just Checo. I don't think it's just Checo. I think Red Bull have to take a significant chunk of the responsibility as to why this hasn't been able to work over, 3.5 years now of Sergio and Red Bull. Checo is a proven asset over his long career. He's done it many a time, and the fact that they just can't make something work, you can't just put that down to Checo. It's embarrassing, frankly, for Red Bull Racing to have such success with one driver, but then not even be able to even get someone who can do a Valtteri Bottas-esque job in the second seat. Valtteri never missed a Q3 in 5 years at Mercedes. I think we all took for granted just how good a job he did. And I'm not being funny, even in 2021, obviously Max outscored Lewis in the end, but Mercedes still got the Constructors' title because Bottas still scored more points than Checo. Red Bull could only dream of that kind of lineup balance, and there is absolutely no excuse, especially considering Red Bull literally own a junior team. They call it a junior team. They do now anyway. They tried to call it sister team for a bit. It is a junior team. There is no excuse that the drivers waiting in the wings shouldn't be able to do a good job. Yet here we are. Look, over these 14 races, I think Yuki's given a very good account of himself. I think he's been in the top 10 drivers this season for sure. However, he's not getting faith. Now, is this because they're looking at his data relative to Checo and not seeing enough of a jump up to offset Checo's commercial viability? Maybe. Is it a mentality thing? Maybe. You know, Yuki's got a reputation. We all know what that is, and I think he is improving. I can understand why Red Bull might look at that, even, you know, Bahrain first race of the year, Yuki blowing up the way he did. I mean, Max, don't get me wrong, Max can have a blow up on the radio, but he backs it up by being the best driver in Formula 1. So you take the double-edged sword that Max Verstappen can be sometimes. Look, I'd love to see Yuki get a shot, but at the end of the day, just because he deserves it, and he does deserve it more than any of the other candidates there, does not necessarily mean, from a performance point of view, he is the right person to put in that seat. That is all that's going to matter to Red Bull, not who merits it more or less. Look, I think they've just extended Yuki's contract to keep Honda happy in their final year as a partner with Red Bull Racing in 2025. And then come 26, Honda will move to Aston Martin. Maybe Yuki will move to Aston Martin. Maybe he'll move somewhere else. But I could definitely see that relationship ending at the end of 25 and then Isaac Hadjar coming in to replace. As for Daniel, well, it was a slow start to this year, but you can definitely argue in the last kind of 7-8 races, he has outperformed Yuki, which certainly helps his cause. We know the only reason he's here is to get a Red Bull seat. There is zero ambition for Daniel to be at Racing Bulls long term because he's in a junior team and is well into his 30s. Now, of course, replacing Ricciardo with Perez, you do get a much more commercially valuable driver in Daniel Ricciardo. Not in the same way to Checo. I think Daniel does more for kind of global brand visibility, but Checo does more for actually shifting cans of Red Bull, especially in that very lucrative North American market. Both shift a lot of merch. You know, a lot of people would be buying Daniel DR3 Red Bull tops if he did join. But then Checo's merch is a bestseller at Red Bull as well. You have to factor that in. This is all just a marketing exercise for these brands. Let's not pretend any differently. The difference with Daniel is that he has experience alongside Max, and he spent 5 seasons at Red Bull in an Adrian Newey designed high rake on the nose car. Yes, that was many moons ago and many regulation revisions ago, but fundamentally I do believe Daniel Ricciardo would be more prepared than any other driver to go into that team alongside that driver. Well, apart from maybe one guy. I think Liam Lawson's contract situation plays into this kicking the can down the road, but also not guaranteeing Checo to the end of the year, in my opinion. It has been widely reported that Liam can leave the Red Bull family if he's not given a contract to either Red Bull Racing or Racing Bulls for 2025. Now that Carlos is confirmed at Williams, that potentially opens the door to an Audi move, potentially an Alpine one as well. Audi seems to be the one that is reported to be more interested in Liam Lawson's services. By giving Checo another 4 races before another 3-week break between Singapore and Austin, you'll give him 4 more races to evaluate whether the total value of Sergio Perez is worthwhile potentially losing Liam Lawson from your family entirely. Daniel Ricciardo is still out of contract and we know he's all in on Red Bull. I would be absolutely shocked if he returned to Alpine or went to Audi. I mean, I could see Audi maybe being interested commercially, but I think that's too much of a project for Daniel. I think he's all in on Red Bull, and I think Christian Horner's very aware of that. So I think he can leave Daniel to sweat a bit. But Liam Lawson is very green. He's all over the Red Bull simulator. He's tested the Red Bull. He's tested the Racing Bulls as well. There is an argument that his relative naivety means that he can develop his natural driving style into one that works with the Red Bull high, pointy on the nose, right? The argument around Sergio is that it's his learned driving style that he's learned over many a year at Force India that just doesn't work with what this Red Bull needs. Once again, would it be muggy for Yuki to miss out to 2 drivers who don't deserve it as much as him? Yes, but that's not what Red Bull are going to care about. It's who's going to do the better job in that car. I think it's Daniel or Liam, but, well, Checo does seemingly at least have another 4 races to prove that I'm wrong. But how has he stacked up over these 4 events over recent years? Well, let's have a little look back to the past, shall we? Last time out in Zandvoort, it was a greasy qualifying session. Checo had a bit of a howler, 1.3 seconds off of Max in the end. Was out-qualified by Alex Albon in a Williams and lined up P7 for the race. Fortunately, the rain came down early doors and Checo made the correct call onto Inters a lap before most people did, which benefited him massively. He was running comfortably P2 as well before the heavens opened up once again. Got onto Inters, but then he wasn't the only driver either who went off at turn 1. He didn't go into the wall like Zhou Guanyu did, but that did cost him. He ended up crossing the line P3, dropped back to P4 with a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane, very naughty. And then there was 22. Checo once again didn't have a great qualifying, lined up P5, 0.735 off of Max. He would have potentially improved right at the end, but he spun off in the final corner before the banking. In the race, he made no progress forward or backwards, finished P5 where he started, 18 seconds behind Max Verstappen. Zandvoort hasn't been a particularly happy hunting ground for Sergio over recent years, averaging P6 in quali over the last 2 events, P4.5 in the race. Monza last year was alright in qualifying, 0.381 off Max in qualifying, with Ferraris both optimising their setup for what is the arguably most important race of the year for the Scuderia. Checo would start P5 and come Sunday he would gradually make his way up through the field, picking off George Russell, Charles Leclerc and eventually Carlos Sainz with 5 laps to go. 1-2 for the team. Checo did exactly what the team wanted of him. Lovely jubbly. Now in 22 things didn't go quite so well, at least on paper. P4 in quali, good on the face of it, 9/10 off Max. However, Checo was serving a 10 place grid drop, so his priority in qualifying would have been to help out Max, give him the tow, and, you know, if his own qualifying falls by the wayside, so be it. Come Sunday, he stopped early onto the hard tyres and was eventually able to recover to P6. All in all, he did a pretty good job. I think there's plenty of reason to believe Monza this year could be a good race for him. Do I really need to explain how Checo goes well at Baku? Well, I will anyway. This is his second home race, essentially, and it's coming at a much later point in the season than it typically does. Last year he qualified P3, just 0.104 off of Max. Then in the sprint shootout qualifying, he put it P2, 0.143 ahead of Max. Wow. And the sprint race itself was a great success. He took the lead from Charles Leclerc and won it all. And as for the main race, again with the old sprint system, you took the qualifying from Friday for the race on Sunday, so Max was still starting ahead of Checo. Both got past Charles Leclerc, but unfortunately for Max, he boxed just before the safety car came out for Nick de Vries hitting the wall. That saw Perez and Charles get the jump on Max, put him back to P3. Checo was leading on the restart and kept it. Max got past Charles on lap 14, but in the subsequent 37 laps, he was not able to catch and pass Checo, and Checo won it again. Won the sprint, won the race, a top tier Sergio Perez Red Bull performance. And as for 22, well, Checo outqualified Max again, only just by 0.065 of a second, and P2 to Charles Leclerc. Both were able to pass Leclerc, and it took 14 laps, but eventually Max was able to find a way past Checo and ran off into the distance, eventually a 21-second advantage over Checo for Max Verstappen. Charles may have been a factor for Sergio, a bit of a scrap for P2 if his car didn't go kaput, a big engine failure for him. This is exactly what Red Bull would have wanted from Checo. Again, yes, 21 seconds off your teammate doesn't sound great, but he did exactly what the team would have wanted. Singapore 23 was a bad race for Red Bull, a one-off stinker that just did not work for their car's fundamental stiff setup characteristic. Checo and Max both dipped in Q2, but Sergio was only 0.137 off of Max, so this clearly wasn't a Perez problem. As for the race, of course, Carlos commanded, took the win, and neither Red Bull was particularly able to make an impression, but you got to say Max did a much better job at recovering, getting back to P5 in the end. Checo was stuck back in P8 behind Pierre Gasly. And then Singapore 22, where Checo once again outqualified Max. He was just 0.022 off of Charles Leclerc. However, there is a big caveat with that. Max probably should have got pole twice. His first lap, he was purple, and then decided to abort it, wanted to go again, and then on that final lap, he had to pull it in because the car didn't have enough fuel. That put him on the back foot, starting P8, and it was just generally a really scruffy race, Max trying to make his way through the pack. Checo, however, got the jump on Charles and won the race without Max up there to steal his vibes. Checo took the win and ensured a Red Bull driver would sit on the top step of the podium, even with a very out of character off day for Max. Not that it was actually Max's fault, because the damage was done in qualifying. But Checo was still there. Zandvoort will be tough for Checo, I think. But if he can't make Monza, Baku and Singapore work, tracks that he knows how to drive this Red Bull around, this tricky Red Bull, he knows how to get the best out of it, or the best out of himself, should I say, in that car, in these tracks. If you can't do that, then it has to be curtains. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.